Today we're going to go over if Awakening Stones actually help or hurt Guardians compared to every other Guardian as the game goes on. Let's go. Okay guys, in this sheet that I've been working on, I wanted to show you guys a couple things. We actually have here all of the statistics for characters at their level 1, at their base, which is basically their percentages times a multiplier based on their level, and then their awakened percentage, what their statistics look like after you max out their Awakening Stones. Our goal with this is to figure out how exactly Awakening Stones affect how a unit scales from early game to late game. To help signify what that actually means, we're going to just look at the actual change between the base level 74 and the awakened level 74 and look at just how substantial it is for different heroes. So right off the bat, you can see that we are filtered by attack percent here. At in-game, Dolph gets an additional 80% attack from Awakening Stones. That is by far the largest number you will see in this entire spreadsheet. So you can signify that if you think that Dolph is a damage carry, you know that you really have to invest in those Awakening Stones in that unit for him to be viable. That is why you often see people look at Arabelle and Lupina and say that they're very, very expensive, as well as someone like Bari, because they are hopefully your damage carry, but they require such a significant investment to get into. Now let's look at HP percentage. And here we can see at the top, Marina and Craig are getting closer to 53% of their HP, which means that if you want them to be tanky, you know that between Marina and Craig, those stones have the largest effect compared to everybody else in the game. And lastly, let's look at defense here. Agma and Lavi and Lon get the biggest increases from the defensive statistics. And between the two of HP and defense, I think prioritizing heroes that need that defensive boost over that HP boost are pretty significant. But in itself, all these three numbers are showing us is how dependent they are for their core statistic on Awakening Stones. So if you're going in here and you're looking at, let's do attack because I think that's the most universally understood, and you're saying, I just rolled a Cremery and I want to know, is she really that mandatory for me to invest in my Awakening Stones? And you can come down here and you can see Grimery is pretty far towards the bottom in the impact that Awakening Stones have on her overall attack. So it may not be a priority for you to invest in her over other options as a priority if she's going to be one of your main damage sources. You can then use this type of information to help you determine how effectively you should be spending your Awakening Stones. But to show off how this actually affects the in-game status in effective terms, I went ahead and created some charts. And what this chart is actually showing us is, did their attack grow or shrink compared to the average growth of a champion based off of the Awakening Stones? So this is going to tell us if Awakening Stones actually shift their priority from in-game to late game. One thing to note about this chart is that the closer they are to the dead center of it, which is right here, the intersection point, that means they are just average in that statistic, both early and late game. So if you see that clumping towards the middle, that's what we need for this chart to have any sort of relevancy to what we are doing. If you see someone like this Lapis continue to trend close to the center, you can just assume that your Lapis is going to have average statistics when it comes to attack. And as you can look down here, we have Gergis, Eugene, and Catherine all trending towards that average mark. And then the further up that they go, the more their Awakening Stones impacted their ability to perform in late game. The further to the right that they are, the higher priority their attack had in the early game. The higher vertically, the more their attack had in the end game. So as you can see, Bari's attack statistic is incredibly important at in-game and early game. Whereas you can come down here and look at Dolph and you can see his attack has very little meaning in terms of his early game performance. He's not very good at attack in the early game, but it's very significant towards how he stands in the end game because he goes from someone below average to someone well above average here. So we can look at this and we can say, okay, Arabelle is trending pretty close to as you expect her to, same as Tinia. Marina actually falls off a bit early game to end game. She does more damage earlier compared to at the end. Should symbolize to you the dramatic difference between the early and the late game of specific heroes. And here on this chart is our defense. Why does this defensive chart look so crazy, guys? Because if you were not aware, when it comes to defense, Marina is freaking an outlier to the nth degree. Do you guys see how ridiculous that is? So if we come back here and we look at the awakening statistics for defense, we see that Marina's is at a 448 and nobody even comes close. I had to go back into the game and triple check that this was the case because it just blows my mind. And here at level 1, look, she's 76 defense. Nobody else is really even touching 40. When it comes to being a defensive tank, Marina is off the charts. So this is more of what it actually looks like if we were to take Marina out of this sucker, because she absolutely blows this away. You can take from this what you need to. It is actually pretty interesting how these statistics play out. And then if you want to know why your Nari keeps getting bursted to oblivion, well, yeah, that's going to do it to you. If you have no mitigation against the HP, you're going to need a ton of HP to survive any amount of burst, which is why we're going to go into HP next. And from the HP, I think we can actually see a little bit more of how these units are shifting across the meta. Someone like Marvin starts out incredibly tanky in terms of his HP, and then he tapers off the further along he goes. Same with someone like Lupina. She goes from being someone that's incredibly strong in terms of HP, probably in the top 75%, top 80% here, to someone that is actually trending closer to average of HP based off of the growth cycle of her awakening stones against the average. That's the most important thing to keep here, that this is against the average of all champions. And just to finish up here and to reiterate, what this does is it shows you that Guardian Tales and the people of Kakao Group are making logical decisions on how they want a champion to place early and late. And that is why it is so important for you to not just look at the max level awakening stones, but to also anticipate the growth cycle of a unit. So what am I trying to actually say here? Well, really all I'm really getting at is that if you're not going to be able to max limit break them at any point and you don't see yourself doing that, and they really need those limit break statistics to scale, it's really important to know what effect the awakening stones have on their progression. If you see someone that's incredibly expensive in terms of their awakening stone priority, which are primarily attack and HP, if you see this significant shift in the way that they move in the meta, it's important to recognize that that turns into cost and time for you that you may or may not be able to afford based on your priority of that unit. I am trying to and working on a way to take that idea and turn it into a centralized metric, but that process is actually kind of hard based off of how the damage calculation formulas work, which if you've seen my last video on why DPS is such a hard topic in this game, you'll know that I got a little bit of work ahead of me. If this is something that you have thoughts on how to go about that metric, leave it in the comments below. But that'll do it for me, guys. Take care.